So this is the second part of our series, Conversations by ATIKA, and today we're joined by George, the founder of Maison de Choup. George, tell me about Maison de Choup. What is it? Why did it start? What's the story?
So I started Maison de Choup a couple of years ago when I was suffering from my severe anxiety and OCD. I used to write down and draw my thoughts and feelings in notebooks, and then as I started to get better through therapy, I started playing around with them on the computer and adding colour and manipulating them, and I thought maybe I could put on a t-shirt to express what I'm going through. So the idea of the brand sort of came from my own thoughts and feelings to then transferring it onto a t-shirt for myself and for my friends and family to understand what I was going through. But then I had the idea that I could actually use fashion as a vehicle to raise awareness and subsequently funds for mental health.
Fantastic. So can you talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about your struggles with anxiety, how that started, and then how that came to be Maison de Choup in the end?
Yeah, so I'd always had anxiety as a young person. At primary school, I was always having to have like breathing exercises and counting to 10 because I was so hyperactive. Through secondary school, it sort of dissipated a little bit because I was always busy. You know, at secondary school, you've got so much work to do. You've got a good friends group, and I was quite popular, so I was okay. And then at the end of that, we were celebrating finishing our school by going to a festival with some friends, and I took MDMA, which is the ecstasy. And I didn't really, I was young, I was 16, I thought this would be great, we'll just experiment with drugs and we'll have a good time. So we snorted it, which was horrific. And then I didn't really enjoy the experience. I sort of heard voices on it, and then didn't really think much of it. So about 3 weeks later, I was in the horses field doing a dung, and I started feeling like hot, tunnel vision, sweating. I thought, oh my God, I'm back on the drug. When actually I was having a panic attack. And that was my first experience of a panic attack, and I'd never had one. And it was absolutely terrifying. It lasted about 45 minutes. I felt like I was going to black out. I thought I was going to die. I wanted to run away. I wanted to curl up in a ball. My parents didn't know what to do. And then that's the first experience of sort of having a panic attack. And I had one every day for the next week. It became sort of apparent to us that there was something wrong, and we went to the GP, and the GP sort of said, you've got anxiety and panic disorder. I'm going to refer you to CAMS, which is where my journey sort of started and kind of went downhill from there.
Wow. Okay. So I find it really interesting that obviously you went through all of that and you went through the treatment, but in the latter end of that, a creative outlet was actually a way to explain that. You talked about it as a way to explain it to your friends and family. Do you mind just talking about your creative process with that? How did that? Have you always drawn? Has that always been a way that you've expressed your emotions? Was that when you were going through, the depths of it? Yeah. Were you drawing, or was it a way afterwards to help you understand?
I suppose a bit of both. I mean, we're a very creative family, and I'm a very creative person. I'm certainly not academic. I think I think visually, and I was going to college. I was going to uni to study photography, so I see photos and stuff, and I also just draw and doodle and write stuff down because I physically couldn't talk about or describe what I was going through. So I was like, how do I get this out? So I just started drawing them. And I remember one of my drawings on the train to college when it was really hard, I was really struggling, it was just a page, and it was just loads of black dots on the page. Or sorry, I was the black dot in the center of the page, and around it just said help everywhere, because I just didn't know how to express myself, and this was my way of doing it, and I found it quite cathartic. Yeah. So sort of expanding on that, I then took it this step further and thought, if I can put this on something to try and get people to understand what I'm going through, I'll try that. So
it's really interesting. So I wanted to talk about, you have a podcast. It's interesting you say you really struggled to talk about it all, and then drawing it and putting it on a t-shirt, and now got a podcast called Talking About. It's quite a nice journey. Yeah. But yeah, can you briefly describe what is the podcast about? Who are the people you've been encountering, and how has that? Obviously, all of this has come from, you're in a place where you, in some ways, have dealt with the extremities of your mental health. But in an ongoing way, has the podcast been a form of therapy for you personally, or is it more for spreading the sort of message that you like to speak about?
I guess the podcast. I mean, I had it as an idea, and obviously I do public speaking, telling my story, but that's not accessible to everyone. And I guess I wanted to get across how severe mental health problems can be. So at the height of my suffering, I was washing my hands 50 to 100 times a day, couldn't touch anything, was having panic attacks, was experiencing severe anxiety, couldn't leave my bedroom for about 3 years unless I was with my parents or anything. And this is a side people don't really see when they're saying, oh, I feel a bit anxious. When reality is, it's terrifying. and I was having the paranoia. So the podcast is sort of painting that picture of breaking it down and making it a more normal conversation. If people are listening and thinking, "Oh my god, that's terrifying."
Yeah.
Someone I know might be going through that. How do I talk to them? So the podcast is literally, I mean, it's just me and my sister. It's sat in her bedroom recording it and going around and visiting guests to just have like this, just a conversation, just an informal conversation, just talking about mental health to make it normal, because there's nothing, we all talk about physical health and if you broke a leg or etc. So the podcast is kind of doing that only with mental health. And we started interviewing guests, and we've ranged from we interviewed some guests recently called the Horse Course, and they use horses as therapy and helping young people and past sort of ex-cons getting better. And it's fantastic to just show the different or the alternative therapies that are out there, as opposed to just medication and this therapy that people sometimes may or may not like, which is obviously CBT therapy, psychiatry, etc. So the podcast is just kind of changing the conversation around that, really.
It's fantastic. I love it's really cool you do it with your sister. I think that's really amazing. I know, but it's really nice that you able to have those conversations like with your family. Like, I know a lot of people can feel really isolated, especially from family sometimes. Like, you might have friends who you're able to speak to. I know in one of your episodes of your podcast you talk about the importance of that support network around you. So no, it's a very like general question, but like how, for people who maybe don't have that or feel like they don't have that, who feel like they can't like reach out to their friends, I just wonder if you could maybe talk about how do you think you can be a support to someone, and if you're going through something, like what's the best way to ask for that support, to build that network around you?
I think the most important part is just being there for them. You can never try and cure someone, because you also can never change someone. Only they will know when they're ready to talk about their mental health. So essentially just reassuring them that you're there, and saying, I'm always here if you need to talk, is the most important part. Obviously I can't offer professional advice because I don't have any. I can only talk from experience, and my family were my support network. They were always there for me. And the psychiatrist told them just to not tread on eggshells and just be there for him. When he needs you, you'll be there. And that alone is comfort in knowing that there was someone there. And I've got my sister now, and there's always someone to talk to when I'm feeling slightly down. So I think it's important to just sort of be there around them and encourage them that it's okay to talk about it. And if ever they do feel like talking, let them know they can talk to you.
Great. I think all of this leads quite nicely onto what the general theme of our sort of this part of our series is we've got to generally talk about men's mental health. You've already talked about, I think it's interesting you talked about that actually drawing was one of the ways that you managed to get to express things. Obviously that's one of the main issues, is how the actual like emotional capability, like how men are socialized, like the actual way to be able to express their emotions. Like you genuinely don't learn a lot of like the vocabulary to like actually express your emotions. I was reading, Aisling B, the comedian. She wrote this fantastic article about her dad who committed suicide when she was younger. But she talks about like the men she's encountered in her life and thinking about that, and how the biggest barrier was actually literally they did not understand the words for I'm feeling this way and this is why and it feels like this. And obviously the statistics, men's suicide, it's 3 in 4 of all suicides are male, the biggest killer of all men under 45. It's quite horrible. So I just wanted to, what is your opinion on the problem with men specifically? Like, do you feel any of your goings on, like things that have happened to you, do you feel like any of that was related to how being brought up as a man broadly? Like, obviously it's different across, every person, but I think there is a general issue with just being a male. Like, it's difficult to overcome some of that.
I mean, I don't think there's any one problem with being a man. I think the problem with being a man is the fact that we have to live up to certain expectations that have been ingrained in society for many years. So men are supposed to be seen as leaders, strong, alpha male, leading the pack type thinking. And when you start to waver from that, oh my God, am I going to get fired from that? I'm not going to be able to do my job. Am I going to let people down? and that there's so much pressure around that men then feel like they can't talk about it. And also there's this lad culture. I'm not a lad, clearly, as you can probably tell. I'm very sort of open and honest about everything, but I feel like the lad culture is as a facade for something. So this trying to be the funny guy, trying to be the hard man, and making jokes all the time. I feel even though they are probably quite funny sometimes, there's something below that's covering up for maybe a problem. And I think that if there was if someone started a conversation around it and said, actually, are you okay? Like, is everything okay? They're 100% going to say, I'm fine, absolutely fine. Of course, even if there's women around.
There's no room for that vulnerability.
There's no room for vulnerability. So Time's changed to a campaign recently called Ask Twice. So if a friend says I'm fine, ask again to see if they are actually okay, because it's sort of 99% of the time someone is not fine when they say I'm fine. It's the biggest lie, isn't it?
Yes.
So I think the culture around being a man is always having to be strong, a leader, and especially in the city. As we're sat here in London, the city is one of the hardest places to change that culture, because it's such a cutthroat industry. So they're always on numbers. They have to be the strongest they can be, otherwise they'll lose their competition. So changing that is very difficult. So I think there's not a problem essentially with men. There's a problem with the culture surrounding what the perspective of men
what we expect.
Like.
What we expect men to be. Okay, so recently you did an Instagram post, a picture of yourself crying, and sort of addressing this issue that we're talking about. Why did you, talk me behind why you felt the need to do that post, how you think, the conversation you were trying to bring about with that?
I think I'm an incredibly honest person. I'm quite an open book, probably too honest. It can be a bit of a flaw sometimes. I'll tell it as it is. But with that post, it was I was walking back from my grandma's grave, who recently passed away, and I just started crying. And I thought, if someone saw me crying now, they'd probably freak out. Like, oh my god, how do I deal with a man crying? What do I do? Like, I've never seen a man cry. So I just posted it, and I was like, just encourage it. I said, look, men cry too. It's okay to cry, and it actually makes you feel better crying. So it's just, as a campaigner, it's just another thing breaking down a barrier of encouraging men to cry, and that it's absolutely okay to do that, because it's a way of expressing yourself, a different way of expressing yourself. And it feels good. Once you've had a good cry, once we've all had a good cry, we all feel a bit better. So it's essentially just, about being non-conformist and posting it and saying, look, men cry too. And if you start doing that more and more, I feel like in my head you start building a culture that if you don't start talking about or crying, then you're the one left out. Like, if all of us said, actually, I cry, and then the guy at the corner saying, I don't cry, they're made to feel like, okay, back. I feel like I'm missing out here. Should I start crying? So if you start changing that culture, I think it's important. Yeah,
I think it's very true. I know that strikes a chord with me personally. I think that's something I always like to think of myself as very open and honest with all of this stuff, but I don't think crying was never just wasn't something I did. And then just some general thing, around a year ago, I remember I just had a moment, I just couldn't stop crying, genuinely, and it was like a couple of hours, and it was really intense, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. And I was literally like, this hasn't happened in years. And then afterwards I was like, oh, that's so much better. And then you could have little cries afterwards.
There's little cries, but they just come and go. Like, you're watching a film or something, or a piece of music comes on, and you're like, I'm crying. Why am I crying? It's just so powerful.
Yes,
it's okay to cry.
Exactly.
Cry. I have emotions. I'm a real person.
Exactly. And it's about how much you like push that down, and then it ties into like you actually dig into why you're doing that. It's like, I'm pushing that down because for some reason I think my girlfriend will see me as less of a, even though I obviously don't think that. Like, there's a part of you that, like you said, the social expectations, that, even the most millennial, woke men among us, still have those, that's still ingrained in you, even just being brought up, in the society we have been. It's great. So Maison de Choup, tell me a little bit more about that. Let's talk about business. How is it going? Where are you selling? What are you doing with it? How many designs do you have?
Yeah, so it's going really well. I mean, it's hard work running a business. Obviously, that's interesting because I've got mental health problems and I've gone into running my own business, which is it's sort of contradictory, but it's going really well. It's really positive. The designs are doing well. People really engage with them, and the point of the brand essentially is to raise awareness and, as I say, funds, and I'll come on to that, is in a subtle, non-triggering way. So all the designs have a story behind them. They're all about mental health, but no one wears a label. No one's walking around with a big label saying, I have anxiety. So they have a story and people can like them, and then they can ask what it means, and it starts a conversation that way. And then 25% of certain collections goes to Young Minds charity, specifically because when I was suffering, and I went to CAMS and they told me I'd have to wait 40 weeks, my parents sent me privately, which I was very fortunate to get. So when I launched the brand, I wanted to give back to a charity that helped the young people not in that same fortunate position. And I used Young Minds resources when I was suffering to find out more about what I was going through, you know, the symptoms. And if you ever Google symptoms, it's just terrible. So I use Young Minds and I wanted to give back to them to help those young people, essentially. And the designs, you know, embarrassingly, I don't know how many designs we have exactly. But we don't do like collection drops. We just drop new designs or new pieces every now and again. And we work with the public on certain designs. So we're collaborating with university students to get their story across, to express their stories, doing lots like that. And we sell online mainly. We do events at our own website, but we're also doing a pop-up in Shoreditch, Old Street, in a couple of weeks. So there's lots going on. Yeah, really lots going on.
And so you talk about Young Minds. You've done a lot of work with Young Minds in the past yourself. Be great to just talk about like what do they do as a charity and how can people get involved with that if they're interested.
So Young Minds are sort of an action-based charity, and they work on changing the I suppose not the culture, but changing things in the mental health industry, and working behind the scenes as well. They're working with Ofsted to change, you know, the reports on what they're doing, well-being over academic grades, and stuff like that. But they also have a parents' helpline to help the parents of the young people suffering. You know, where do parents go when they've got a young person with anxiety? Where do they go? So they can call Young Minds Parents Helpline, and they've also got now a crisis messenger as well, which people can use. So they're a brilliant charity. Only 25 years they've been going in there. And they're growing, so they're a great charity, and I do lots for them. So.
Great. And then, obviously, you can't give us any sort of exhaustive list, and this isn't any way to exclude anything else, but I was just wondering, are there any resources that you, being someone involved in the mental health conversation, just generally any resources that you have found personally helpful or friends and colleagues have found really helpful that you can recommend to anyone listening?
Yeah, so I'd recommend something which isn't quite new, called the Hub of Hope, which is like it's an app which you can put in your location. It will come up with a list of places near to you or around you that can help you with your mental health, and that's really fantastic, and that's great. But there's also loads of others out there. So one recently launched is called Shout, which is a messenger text crisis thing, and that can help you as well. And also, obviously, just finding resources online. So you've got Mind, you've got Calm, and obviously Young Minds, about finding more about your symptoms. And if you need to take it further, go to the GP or speak to someone about it. But the most important thing is understanding that it's okay not to be okay.
Thank you very much, George. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and everyone, please check out Maison de Choup. Where can we find you and all of your stuff?
So Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all the social media channels, LinkedIn as well.
Great.
But my personal one is just George David Hodgson on Instagram, where you can follow my amazing stories, and also just the brand is Maison de Choup.
Fantastic.
Online.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll link all of that in with this and some of the resources and stuff that you mentioned. Yeah, thank you very much. So keep an eye out for the rest of this Conversations by ATIKA series soon.